Good evening. I'm Anne McLean from the library's music division. We're thrilled tonight to be opening our Salute to Strayhorn, a 3-day mini-festival celebrating the music and legacy of an extraordinarily gifted composer, arranger, and pianist. Billy Strayhorn's profound influence on generations of musicians continues to grow exponentially 56 years after his death. Here at the library, the Billy Strayhorn collection documents what our former jazz curator, Larry Applebaum, called the creative work of a musical architect of the highest order, one who added greatly to the brilliance and beauty of 20th century music. It's super exciting for us to present 2 concerts this week, offering a sparkling and very wide-ranging sampling of great Strayhorn classics and a few fascinating unknown gems, thanks to the lady on my left, Alyce Claerbaut, who is president of Strayhorn Songs Incorporated. We also have film screenings tomorrow and the next day, and a very close focus symposium on Saturday afternoon with a distinguished group of scholars, some of whom are here tonight, and will be with us tomorrow. More on this in a moment. So I'm very pleased today to be talking with Alyce and my friend on the left, who has been also our partner for the last 3 years through this project. We had a long pause during the pandemic, and we've had other delays through our flooded auditorium. But we're very excited to be doing this beautiful concert with the terrific pianist, Bill Charlap, who's appearing tonight with his trio, and trumpeter, John Faddis. And we would also like to acknowledge the members of the Strayhorn family who are going to be with us this week. So Alyce, you and Bill have worked together for a long time, and you've seen a lot of milestones in the way that Billy Strayhorn's music has been reflected and is now being perceived. And I was wondering, we'd like to hear from you in a moment about some of those milestone projects, but for the moment, how do you think he would have thought about this celebration? What would have been his reaction if he were here?
He would be pleased. He would be very, very pleased.
How did you begin work together? I know you've had a couple of major projects, the big Lush Life recording that went along with the documentary. I'd like to hear about that.
Well, simply, Billy Strayhorn's music has been part of the constellation, just like the Milky Way or Orion or anything that has always felt like any work of any major genius in the art world, which is that it has always existed and it took that artist to uncover it. And it's always been part of the constellation that I grew up with knowing about. I guess the very first Billy Strayhorn song that I knew was Lush Life. I'm trying to figure out why. Probably because of 2 albums that my mother had in her collection. One was Sarah Vaughan, was Sassy, Sarah Vaughan with Hal Mooney's arrangement. And then the other was, of course, the iconic and important Pete Rugolo arrangement with Nat Cole, which I had on a 45. So the opulence, the vision, the extraordinary, complete world of music that is Billy Strayhorn's music, I was always aware of. As I developed as a musician, played with other musicians, and you know, Lush Life is thought of as one of the focal pieces ever. It's so important. And then, of course, growing up and understanding more and more about the central figures of this music. You know, no one is more central than Louis Armstrong, Duke Ellington, and Billy Strayhorn. There was a project that was put together by Blue Note Records quite a number of years ago now. It had various artists who were at the time signed to the label, celebrating Billy Strayhorn's music and Robert Levy's Levi, his documentary, and Diane Reeves, Joe Lovano, Hank Jones, and various others. And it was there that I got to play Tonk for the first time, the great piece that Billy Strayhorn wrote for Duke Ellington for piano, four hands, which subsequently I've played, well, with Renee Rosnes, who's sitting over there, who is my wife, and she is one of the greatest pianists in the world. I was also always aware of Renee before we got together and became more than a duo partnership. But boy, I got to play Tonk sitting next to Hank Jones, so that was really something. Anyway, Alyce and I have been in conversation and talking about reflecting on the importance of this music, and I think I've talked enough. I'd love to hear what you have to say.
Well, thank you so much for that assessment that you have, and that is becoming more and more the case as more young people hear about him. And speaking of young people, I knew Billy Strayhorn growing up in New York, and I lived about 4 blocks from him, and he was always interested in what young people were doing in music. So I went to a high school in New York, and they had a jazz band. So I said, hey, Uncle Billy, come to my high school. We're going to have the jazz band's going to play. And he said, sure. And we took the A train down. He stood and downtown, and he held the pole. And so when I walked in and told my music teacher, she didn't know it was an assembly, and I never thought of anyone knowing him, and so I said, well, this is my Uncle Billy Strayhorn, and she almost fell off the stage. But the young people were talking to him, and so, those of us who got to know him, he had a very sharp wit and joking all the time. And when he'd write music, we'd run errands for him. Like I was sitting at the piano with him one time when he was writing the scoring for Paris Blues, and having that relationship. And I myself was not a musical person at that point. I later did that, but not at that point. But one time, this I thought was interesting. And when I was going to college, I was going to Grand Rapids, and he bought my luggage for me, so I had to go down and pick it up because I only lived 4 blocks from him. And I said, well, I'm not getting a cab, so I'll take a girlfriend with me. And she was a music major at Columbia University. So, and we were doing some other things at our church at the time. So I said, come on down, I'm just going to pick this up and walk to my house. So she said, okay. So when we went to his place, we had to talk to the doorman. And so she was up in going up in the elevator, and she said, well, what does your uncle do? I said, oh, well, he's a musician. So when we got to the door was open, and so I walked in, and I said, hey, Uncle Billy, how are you? He said, yeah, darling, here's your luggage, and it's red. And the only reason I'm giving you red luggage is because you're going to Grand Rapids and not Paris. So I can trust you. So he said, oh, well, where's your friend? And I said, oh, where's Betty? She was still standing at the door saying, Billy Strayhorn. Because she was a music major and she knew who he was. But, and Leslie can tell you about she asked him about the Beatles. Come on, family, now,
Okay, I had a teenager and visiting Uncle Billy. He was sick at the time, but spending a little bit of time with him and talking about music in general. And I'm just not okay. I'm not a jazz person, or I certainly wasn't at the time. I was more, whatever was popular, and certainly the Beatles. So it did come up, and I said, well, what do you think about them? And he said, they're really fine musicians. Mm-hmm. And my feeling at the time was, okay, he'll do. This is the good uncle.
Yes. And he, and as you know, I was the executive director of the jazz band that for 30 years was the orchestra and residence for the Kennedy Center Honors. And so we got to go every year and meet all these people, and Barbra Streisand was getting the award. So I had a chance to chat with her, because when Billy Strayhorn heard her, he came, said, you should hear this new singer. She's going to be the singer for a generation. So I told her that. And she started to cry, and she said, you'll never know how much it meant to me that you told me that story. You know, so we learned, we had to evolve and learn about where the places were where he was known. His legacy, though overshadowed by the Duke Ellington in some ways, because Duke owned the marquee, let's face it. And we were living in a time when we needed, very bluntly, some black heroes. And he clearly had that stature. You know, you can't take it away from him. So that was a very important connection. But there were always people somewhere who knew who he was, because his legacy wouldn't have lasted this long if that had not happened. So that's what I am still learning about. And of course, David Haydou's fabulous book, which was a very definitive look at that legacy. But even today, more and more young people, you know, when Lady Gaga recorded Lush Life, and, you know, so I almost hear him talking to the young, you know, and so anyway, those are my personal reflections. So anyway, I can't speak clinically like you can, but those are my personal reflections, knowing who he was as a person, you know, and so that comes through. He scored his own life with his music.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah. So.
You know, I was thinking about the very early pieces that are documented in our collection. If we have over 18,000 items, and the story of how that collection came to the library, I'd like to have you tell. But I was looking at some of those pieces, and by the way, there's a gorgeous little sampling in the cases out tonight. You can see a number of treasures, including Take the A Train and some beautiful, pristine manuscripts. We're very proud of being able to preserve these here at the library. But in terms of, you were talking about young people, and I was thinking about his own very, very young years in Pittsburgh, and the incredible documentation of that astonishing early gift that he had, that we have in the manuscripts. We have the manuscript for Lush Life, and we have a number of early songs written long before he ever went to work with Duke Ellington. 10 notebooks of great pieces. And Bill, you recorded music from Fantastic Rhythm, the show. I was wondering if you both could talk a little bit about that. This is a show from his teen years, and it's astonishing. I didn't know this story, but you could tell a little also about the background, his musical background in Pittsburgh.
Well, I don't know very much about Fantastic Rhythm, the show. I did play the piece, Fantastic Rhythm, and other music, but I must say one thing. You were talking about, I went to the High School for the Performing Arts. One of the great things about going to the High School for the Performing Arts, when it was on 46th Street, between 6th Avenue and Broadway, first of all, it was a New York City public high school. Mm-hmm. That meant that all of my classmates were there for one reason, talent. And you had black and white and Asian and Russian and straight and gay and gospel music and jazz and classical music and dancers and actors. Everybody was there. And it was like a family. And I don't know why I'm thinking of that. Well, I do. I'm thinking of the idea that here's Billy Strayhorn, a teenager in Pittsburgh, African American, gay. The courage, the extraordinary, profound courage to be himself in any world but the world that he grew up in. It's astonishing. And the true dignity and pride, well, that's all. It's just that, like you said, the Beatles are wonderful musicians, It's like Maestro Bernstein said about the Beatles. He said, how can you not love the Beatles? Paul McCartney sounds like an angel. He famously said that. But we all knew when we heard all great musicians, or even good musicians, or even just people who love music. When we hear Billy Strayhorn's music, we know we're hearing something singular, something extraordinary, something from another world, something from real genius, real elusive, original, unique, sometimes incredibly opulent, sometimes filled with every color of the rainbow, sometimes light, sometimes dark, sometimes happy, sometimes sad, sometimes all of those things all at the same time. That's all. Just thinking that.
It is a very profound thought. And the story of where we are today, of course, with the Library of Congress, my brother, my oldest brother, he's the oldest nephew. He was not able to be with us today because he has health issues, but he was here in 2019 when we had our first symposium, Gregory. And he knew Billy Strayhorn ever since he was 3 years old. And he was there when Duke had auditioned for Duke. And Billy had his first gig. Then he came home, and my brother Gregory was living with my mom and her mother at the time. And so Billy came home, and Duke gave Billy like $20 or something. And so Billy Strayhorn went and bought my brother Gregory a very expensive pair of shoes for a 3-year-old. And his mother said, we're trying to buy groceries. But this started a lifelong bond between the two of them. And Gregory was Billy's executor. And when Billy died, Gregory was 30 years old. And there's a picture of him in Jet magazine, almost collapsing, coming out of St. Peter's Church. But Billy told him, now, all I want you to do is take care of my stuff. And that ringing in his ears for 55 years, that's what Gregory did. He saved every scrap of paper, whatever it was intense, because by the time it got to the Library of Congress, he had it close to 50 years. Managing, he was not going to let it go. And he met Walter Vanderloor, and he looked at and wrote a book, and he worked with David Haydu, as you know, David's nodding. And because of that act of being so precise, and when we had the opportunity to look, we had offers from other places. Oh, we really did. But the Library of Congress, we said, yeah, that was the place. And we are so pleased with it because we've had people actually come in those archives because we have a contract, but they have to get permission to, get in to copy those things. And people are utilizing it and doing wonderful things. One concerto was done with the Boston Symphony, Keith Lockhart conducting the world premiere of the Strayhorn Concerto. And that was last year or 2 years ago. And orchestras are being more and more interested in his work, so it's expanding. Now, I think interesting, there are an enormous amount of albums dedicated to Billy Strayhorn, probably more in jazz than a little bit. And one of the first ones was Art Farmer. It was 1976, and it was starting around 1976. We noticed then Toshiko Akiyoshi, then Marion McPartland, and and there's all these people, Tommy Flanagan, and all these great people doing these albums. And so we were wondering, gee, why 1976? Why is all of this springing? Well, I think it may have had to do with the fact that Duke Ellington died in 1974. And so the licensing and everything of tempo I think it had an impact on it. And so I just think that's one of the factors. And people started, it was important to get the music out there. So when we're talking about take care of my stuff, we're talking about what do you do, and when we were through a major landmark copyright case, we were awarded the right to take the publishing. It was the Sonny Bono Amendment that Bill Clinton signed into law in 1998, and our case was the first test of that law.
You and your brother really fought for
And
this.
yeah, and so I have to talk about Gregory's sojourn through all that, and that was the basis upon which we were able to form the company for the purpose of publishing the music. So when we won that lawsuit, we kind of looked at each other and said, great, we got the publishing rights. Now what are we going to do with them? And so all of our cousins, Larry, we have a lot of great family members who are very capable, and we put together this company. And in 2020. An interesting story. At that time, this catalog had been sold to another company, and the Duke Ellington's family no longer owned it. So it wasn't the Ellington family that sued us, it was the new publisher, because they didn't know about this law. That, here they get this Duke Ellington catalog, and now we're saying we're taking Take the A Train, which was the first song to come back. And of course, the issue with that was the Ellington centennial was going to be held in 1999. And so they said, oh no, we need to do that. So needless to say, we were all able to settle nicely because
It's
of
wonderful. to
yeah.
have
So
these
that's the
available
interesting story
to
about how
people,
that
and
happened.
people are still researching madly and we have researchers a lot in the library who come to look at these things, and there's still scores and scores of manuscripts and items that are not fully researched and not fully identified, and that's an exciting tale too. And I wanted to ask you if you'd tell about the trumpet piece that is going to be done in the big band concert tomorrow night. The one that you said was a special copyright one you and Lauren Scherberg had found.
Yeah, there's it's called Hark for the Duke's Trumpets. And we discovered it in all of these manuscripts and everything, and it wasn't copyrighted, but it was based on Billy's manuscripts. There is a recording of it with Duke Ellington, but it was never copyrighted. So we were able to copyright it, and being the wonderful, generous people we are, we added Duke's name to the copyright as well. It was the only decent thing to do, So that was no problem, but Billy's name was first because it was in his manuscripts. And what it is, it's a full band score, and I had the score, and I was able to send it to Lauren, for the big band. And it's a whole band score, and it has the usual setup. Billy only used 3 trumpets. He never had a bass trombone. That was kind of the way he did his, But you look at the sections, and then the staffs on the score for the 3 trumpets were totally blank. There were no parts written for the 3 trumpets, but there were 3 trumpets listed as part of the score because they had to do their head arrangements. And so that was what that was about. And we thought it was kind of like that tongue-in-cheek kind of a thing. And so I sent it to Lauren, and he was, oh, this is fabulous. So they're going to, and Duke had, I think it was Cootie Williams and Clark Terry, and I forget the third one. So I thought that might be kind of a nice little revelation and interesting piece. He was really excited about that. So
we're grateful to you for all these that you allowed us to use, and we're going to try to put them on the web if we can work that out. But speaking of trumpet, I was interested first. I think that Strayhorn studied trumpet as a high schooler, but also I was wanting to ask you, Bill, how it is that you program. How did you build your program with John Faddis as a trumpeter? I know he's got a gorgeous lyrical approach, but this is such an interesting combination.
Well, the first thing is my trio with Kenny Washington at the drums and Peter Washington at the bass. We've been together for about 25 years now. And we can't really believe it. So we look at each other and say, What? 25 years? It's a long time. But the chemistry was so great from the get-go, the very first time we played, which is actually the very first tune on the very first album that we made. So you can say, oh, I guess the chemistry's there. That's the trio, the rhythm section that's playing tonight. John Faddis is one of the world's great virtuoso trumpet players, of whom there is no one of a higher class in terms of simply playing the instrument. He was and is Dizzy Gillespie's protege, really more than anybody else. And, you know, you can't get deeper than that, you know, from Louis Armstrong to Roy Eldridge to Dizzy Gillespie to John Faddis. He's really right in that very, very deep line. John also understands the nuance of the music so profoundly. He is, well, you know, every musician in this music, everybody's got to be a drummer, and everybody's got to be a singer. Mm-hmm. Singers have to be drummers, drummers have to be singers, and we all are, all of those things. And John has that type of swath that he can cut, that understanding of the whole being greater than its parts. He was the leader of the Carnegie Hall Orchestra for many years. He knows the music from that standpoint, and he just knows it very, very deeply. So I knew that we would have an operatic singer who could go everywhere from Billie Holiday to Billy Eckstine. You know, he has that in his trumpet playing, and also the virtuosity of Armstrong through Dizzy Gillespie and to John Faddis. And that's what we were thinking about in playing with John. And also we're dear friends and have been playing together for, well, just about as many years. I want to mention, just so we keep saying as an aside, but David Haydu, who wrote the definitive biography of Billy Strayhorn, is sitting over there. Yes. So that's him. And if you don't mind me being the slightest bit, well, no, I won't say it's sentimental. It's actually deeply grateful to be here. You were talking about 1976, and then that's when that happened. Well, I have to have some magical spiritual thinking on this too, because that was the bicentennial, wasn't it? And that was also a celebration of America. And Billy Strayhorn is America. The real America. That's it. And to be here at the Library of Congress, playing his music with you and all of these members of his family, and with Kenny and Peter and John, for all of you, is profoundly moving to me, and I thank you all for giving me that opportunity to celebrate his magnificence with you. That's all.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
So meaningful. And I was thinking too, Alyce, when I was asking you the other day about, I mentioned that having postponed this project, we now find ourselves at a meaningful point in that we are presenting it during Pride Month. And you and I were talking about his life as an openly gay man, black jazz musician. This is the perfect time, really, for us. And if you didn't notice our little brochure, we have a handsome brochure which has a charming image of him, which is really sweet. But I applaud everything that you said. Yes. It is so very true. And as I say, the collection is it's a gem in what our holdings are in American music. And we're grateful to the family, very grateful, to be able to have it here and to share it with researchers and everyone. I also wanted to say that a thank you to our former jazz curator, Larry Applebaum, who went to
Yes.
Pittsburgh to meet you and the family, talk to you all, and without his passion and deep involvement with his music, we would probably not be celebrating today in the way that we are. So we have a lot to be grateful for, I think all of us. And I wanted to say a word too about the folks that are in the room. David Haydu, who's been very modestly quiet, and we didn't want to point out, we didn't want to bring him up here, but it's amazing. The book that he's written has been the foundation for so much of what everyone knows about Strayhorn today. But he was telling me that, of course, he had worked with your music long before we ever got it here. And so many people, the other people I wanted to mention who are researchers, we have a panel of true experts. If you're coming on Saturday, you will hear the most informed Strayhorn folks on the planet. So we have Lisa Barg, who's written a new book, Queer Arrangements, and we're very proud to have this being talked about here. Upstairs is in our LJ 119 room. And Alyce will also be speaking about new projects for the family, and I hope maybe you'll mention one or two now. And also, Marlon Martinez, a young man who's a band leader and has done a fantastic video series on Strayhorn. And Robert O'Mealy, who I think is still recuperating from a trip to Paris. He flew in just for this symposium. So he is an expert on Paris Blues, the film that we're screening. In any case, you have something to look forward to, as well as the big band concert. But
And Anne, we also need to thank Anne McLean for your brilliance
yes.
and your
Yes.
passion. Thank you, Anne.
All of us. But you know, before I wanted to just tell a few of the super exciting things that are coming up, and then maybe we can have a couple questions. You have so many exciting productions.
And I wanted also to add to Bill's comment, you have been amazing. She has forwarded this effort. And when that pandemic came 3 years ago, and then each year, and then every crisis that ever happened, she was right in front of the line. She did not retreat. She was the general that stayed with us. So we thank you so much for
You're so welcome.
the effort, and Sue Vida and others.
Right there.
Yes,
Our
you have
boss.
really
You'll
forged
meet her
this,
tonight
yes.
when she introduces the concert. But just tell us, just for one moment, about the Jump for Joy and, Nutcracker project, the ballet, and yeah.
Well, we have a number of exciting things coming up. One of a gentleman, Rob Zellers, who is a Pittsburgh native, he wrote a script and brought it to my brother Gregory Morris, and said, I got a script, I'd like to do a play about Billy Strayhorn, something to live for. And he wrote, it's a fabulous script. And we saw the first reading of it in 2017. And, so it's been in development. And now it is, he has teamed with Kent Gash, who was the former head of the Tisch School. And now they have a completed script, and they've worked it through. The first director was Billy Porter, but he left to go to be on Pose, the TV show. So even during the pandemic, they kept working on this script. And so now it is going, there was a reading in March in New York for interested people, investors, or anyone who's interested, and there was a lot of interest. So now the full-fledged production is going to premiere in Pittsburgh in September, and we're really excited about that because I think they have the wind at their back. Pittsburgh now has a lot of great cultural organizations that have developed and a lot of great cultural czars, the Manchester's Craftsman Guild, and a new Benedum Theater, which is now the Pittsburgh in the Broadway in Pittsburgh, 2,800 seats. And so it's Billy's hometown. And so they're very excited about that. And the hope is that this will be the wind at their back to continue to a possible Broadway production. And they're getting a lot of support for it, so that's coming up. And then David Garfinkel, many of you may know of him because he did Spider-Man on Broadway. He has put together a team to do the Ellington Strayhorn Nutcracker. And the score itself is something that everyone's heard because every orchestra plays it, back to back each year. But this is a full-fledged ballet, jazz ballet. And Josh Bergassi is the director. He's a very well-known director in dance. He's actually doing the West Side Story for the lyric opera. I mean, he's just, and Carmen de la Vallada, who is one of the advisors on it, and John Clayton was the arranger who did the scores. And so that's going to premiere in Pittsburgh, and then New York City Center in November, and then Chicago's Auditorium Theater. And the Auditorium Theater in Chicago has vested it, which means it will be an annual, because they lost the Joffrey last year, and so they lost that Nutcracker. And when this came along, they said, wow, this is really great. So we're excited about all of those, and more publicity will be coming out about them. But you can visit our website, billystrayhorn.com, and find out more about these events coming out, keep up to date.
Wonderful.
So, the music is, and it's called Sugar Hill. And it plays homage to both Billy Strayhorn and Duke Ellington. So, anyway, we're looking forward to that.
I should mention to you, for those of you who don't know, and probably that's very few here, but the Ellington Nutcracker is the complete Tchaikovsky score arranged and re-envisioned by Billy Strayhorn and orchestrated for the orchestra. If you've not heard the original recording, run and find it. It is extraordinary. It is truly one of the most unbelievable reimaginings in that it's 100% Tchaikovsky. It is 100% Billy Strayhorn. It is 100% Russian. It is 100% African American. It is so many hundreds of percents.
Yes.
It's thousands of percents because there's so much in there, and it speaks so deeply and swings so beautifully, and it is everything that orchestra was about. The collective in that orchestra, but yet you have the incredible solo voices playing. Just the vision of it, it's just really something. In fact, when I first heard it, I fell off my chair so hard that I ran to the record store and euphemistically fell off my chair. But I ran to the record store because at that time there was still a record store, and I found it. I couldn't find it anywhere. It was out of print. You couldn't find it. Now we have Spotify. You can find it, and you can get it on a CD or anything other way that you want to get it. But at the time it was very hard to find, and I finally found it for $50. And I plunked that $50 down so fast. I was so happy to get it. It was like I felt like Charlie Bucket with a golden ticket. So anyway, I just want to say
And
that
I
really
think you
is
had a
something.
question.
Oh, yeah, I just wanted to point out Lisa has a whole chapter of the Nutcracker that's sweet in her book. Beautiful.
Yes.
Little plug.
Yeah. And I also want
Thank
to, and I want, yeah, she has done a wonder. We shared the centennial together, and she came to Chicago. We really did. And I want to also introduce you to Marlon Martinez. Raise your hand. He's a young musician who has the Marlonius Big Band, and he's a Strayhorn fan, and he is going to do a presentation of his modules he's done called Strayhorn Sundays. 5-minute, about the actual, he's a graduate of Colburn Conservatory, and as we got to know Marlon, he said, well, I learned this because, my parents are in the music business. And we said, oh, that's really good. He's, so one day I said, Marlon, tell us about your parents. He says, oh, my mother is Josie James, who sang with Burt Bacharach, the first Say a Little Prayer for Me, for You. And his dad is Nigel Martinez, who was a producer for Billy Ocean. And so anyway, he comes from a great heritage, and he's a genius, young genius who's really lifting the legacy to a phenomenal degree. So thank you so much. And just one more thing, can all the Strayhorns raise your hand? So people know how many of us that are here, so. Thank you. And all of us work. We're all busy with this organization. We truly have a family organization. The success, and now we even have our successors who are, because the company's 20 years old. And so there's something to succeed. So, we're very proud of that, and that we have all been able to successfully.
Your foundation also supports students and projects.
That's right. We have the Billy Strayhorn Scholarship, and now it's going to be part of Berkeley College of Music, the piano competition for scholarships. And Galen, who is one of our Leslie's brother, another nephew of Billy Strayhorn, he kind of put that together. He's at University of Louisville, but he put that together. And I mean, everyone in the family, we now have an online store for memorabilia. You can see the T-shirt there with Billy Strayhorn. And John is our business guru over here. And so everybody, I make them all work. I whip them into shape. No, it's a pleasure. It's a work of love. We really love the legacy, and we started out for the purpose of building the legacy. We coined the phrase 21st century Strayhorn because we didn't want anyone thinking we were trying to infringe on Duke Ellington's 20th century composer, and that we said, well, Billy Strayhorn, we will put him in a position where he will stand on his own feet. And surely he has done that. So, thank you.
We just have time for maybe one or two quick questions because I think Bill will need a little time to warm up and so on. Is there somebody who has a question that they'd like to give us? No takers? You have, yeah.
What happened to Samara Joy?
I would say she pulled out of the contract. That's life, and we all know how that's like. One thing I was going to just mention when you were talking about the 21st century, that is so powerful and reminds me of something I was reading. I think in your book, Illustrated History, that book about Billy Strayhorn's music being futuristic. And I hadn't thought of it that way, but I was thinking to myself harmonically and conceptually in so many ways that is the music of the future. So your 21st century slogan is right on the mark, for sure. So, well, if you folks don't have any questions, I think we'll let these artists and spokesmen have a break here. Thank you for coming, and don't forget to come to our other events.
Tell everyone. Thank you so much.